Thank you very much, Tracy. We'll just open it up to...
I have one. It's a real specific question. You might have answered it for me in the past, but what are the panels made of? Or do you have a model for what so the frame would be cement, but limit smaller amounts of cement because it would have to support a lighter...
Yeah, so we lighten the house up, and so, without getting into the engineering too much, we've talked, I think, maybe one-on-one about F equals ma. It's a universal law, but when an earthquake hits, it's the ground accelerating. And ultimately, the amount of force F it imparts on a home is really proportional to the mass. So one of the basic tenets is just to bring that mass down. So we lighten the structure. So the panels, we explored a lot of different possibilities. One possibility was saying, oh, can we use agricultural waste? There are very simple technologies to heat and pressurize that waste and turn it into a panel. Part of the problem you run into is there's not a lot of waste per se. The sugarcane is reused as a fuel source, for example. So you would be creating a new problem by taking this to address this problem. Another option is recycling the plastics. Okay, so taking the bottles that you've seen all over there, chipping them, and then heating them and pressing them into a panel. That's another option. There are even some universities looking at recycled plastic houses. We don't feel so positive about the ones where you see the trash compacted into cubes and stacked. But we did find some of the models coming out of Berkeley that were trying to chip the plastic and reuse it as potentially viable. But ultimately, we did go to the lowest hanging fruit because those two are still in our eyes something that's a subject of research and development. So we went to a thin concrete panel, which commercially they're produced in the US as well, using simple reinforcing mesh that you can buy in the market in Leogane, and then using a lightweight mixture of concrete to cast a very thin panel. And so that's what we're doing, we're casting it. So we're trying to reemploy what they already know how to do in the marketplace, right? That guy's pressing those blocks, he can cast a panel in the same way. And so we're trying to kind of tap into that local entrepreneur and say, hey, we got a new product line that can flank your block. And that's part of the business plan, which I should emphasize. So much of this is not engineering. And that was the wake-up call, right? We went and saw what went wrong, and we could see the problem, and then we said, well, we want to solve the problem. We started realizing, this is the first time we've had to solve a problem where those pillars weren't supporting our traditional chain of solution. So we had to get into the business plan part and all this stuff, which is, it's fascinating, and it's a reminder to us as engineers that we shouldn't be working in a vacuum in that building. We should hang out here a little more.
And is it still strong enough?
Yeah.
So it still meets the requirement of having, because strong walls is an issue, right?
Strong wall security is a big issue, and that's why a lot of the solutions people are proposing, they are lightweight, but they're not strong, and they don't create a sense of security. So with the panels, the nice thing is that the panels hang off the frame, and you could actually sandwich multiple panels to thicken that wall. And then you can stucco and finish over it, and you wouldn't know that it's not a blockhouse. You couldn't see it on the outside. So that's the cool part of it. And by doing multiple panels, they can remain lightweight enough for a guy to hang them, and hang multiple if they want, and then fasten them off, and then stucco over. So it goes up very fast. That was one of our other requirements. We don't want a family waiting weeks and months to stack block to get a house. So, yeah.
You mentioned government as one of the assumptions that is often taken for granted. What's the attitude of the government towards the project?
Well, the attitude with the government towards the project is they don't really meddle in individual residential housing. That's the problem. So that lack of presence in that construction process is what creates the vulnerability. So it's presently unsupervised, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. To be honest, if there was centralized oversight of construction processes, even for residential construction, our life would be a lot easier. Then we would go from the top and implement a model that trickles down. But the problem is there's no top to trickle it down, so we're feeding it up by actually working with the construction teams, using the existing modalities for building the master builder models that exist in the towns. So these people are the ones who hold the knowledge. They're kind of the gateway to construction. And so everything has to percolate up through them, unfortunately, because we don't have a top-down structure. So, yes?
Yeah, you talk about kind of the cooperative structure being within these cities for the different mechanics and whatnot to be utilized communally. But I'm curious then on that point, if then you tapped into or found existing kind of social networks among these lower income persons within the cities, whereby you could operate through that cooperative structure.
It's so essential. It's absolutely essential. When we start looking at, I'll back it up into a bigger picture of just technology adoption. What we're offering here is to ask Haitians to shift back to a practice they never saw constructed before. Those gingerbread houses predate the folks in town. So you're trying to convince them to shift to something new. And that technology adoption curve is hard to traverse. So part of our business planning is looking at in the families we identify to roll out the prototype houses, we want ones that have strong networks, because it is that network that gets other families to buy in and become part of the process. Our business plan looks at multiple potential channels to get buy-in and accelerate adoption by using networks. And one nice thing about Leogane is they have organized a self-organization process that evolved into something called CURL, Citizens United for the Rebuilding of Leogane, because they got frustrated with the lack of attention to this town's needs, and they self-organized. So part of our effort is to use those existing networks of people who are trusted leaders within the community to help move these new ideas into the marketplace. The good news for us, because I'll be honest, we had no idea if this would be embraced, but from the feedback we're getting from our translators on the ground who are doing the surveys now in a wider community outside of the initial ones we tried when we were present in Haiti, they're telling us, people are like, we love it, when are you guys coming? So the good news is that we don't see the initial aversion to the technology that we were afraid we might have to convince them that this is worth trying. I don't know if it's desperation or if it's seeing what went wrong and the interest in trying something new, but something has definitely evolved organically among the IDPs that they're wanting to try this and they're interested in it. So this survey data that's being collected through the Kellogg grant is going to be very important to inform us at how we're going to move up that curve and get people on board and how we're going to use our networks to do that. So we're databasing all the IDPs right now as we speak. So, yes?
Yeah, so just a question related to a point you made about the 2- and 3-story structures being more vulnerable than the 1-story structures. Was it the case that that the poor people who had only one-story structures were in better shape than the middle classes?
Most definitely the folks who had put that next slab on top, anticipating a future, even maybe putting some bricks and already starting to build that second floor, those were a lot of the collapses with the larger homes. But what we also found is even in the homes with a metal roof, the walls collapsed in on them. So they still lost their home. Even if the column survived and the roof was there, all their walls had fallen in, so they still were displaced. And that was the Papillon house. One of the houses we went to was Papillon's, where he was living. And that was exactly what happened there. The roof was intact, but the walls had peeled in. And we heard lots of stories of people just being killed by the weight of the wall coming in on them without the roof coming down. So unfortunately the walls, and that's a big part of this technology adoption, helping people understand why their house fell down. It actually is the walls. The walls were the culprit. A lot of the reconstruction has been intelligent in that it's not trying to go multi-story until they kind of understand construction better and how to mitigate some of these vulnerabilities. But the walls will still fail. And so we'll still have those walls peeling in and potentially crushing people inside. And even if they don't crush them, they'll lose the house. It'll be unusable.
Right. So just a couple of the questions.
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering how you prevent the taking shortcuts and stretching the structure beyond what it can reasonably support. For example, building 2nd and 3rd floors on top of buildings constructed only for 1 floor without an inspection system.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a way to do that? And my second question is about the market viability. I mean, can this process that you guys have developed, transfer itself to communities where you don't have an intensive investment by Notre Dame and other?
Yeah, and we're not investing at all in it, so I should preface that. Zero investment. This research is being funded by a collection of minor funds from organizations like Kellogg, the National Collegiate Innovators Alliance. But when we're saying minor, we're saying tens of thousands of dollars, whereas reconstruction is a much bigger price tag. And our own discretionary funds. So we've kind of done this piecemeal approach. In terms of, let's talk first about market viability. The McCloskey plan competition, we'll see if the eyes of the business world feel it's viable. It is definitely in the eyes of NCIA, the Collegiate Inventors and Innovators Alliance, one of their pet projects. They love it. Because it's ambitious in that it's tackling a consumer good that we normally don't talk about, building a house. Okay, selling a solar lantern, a water purification kit, those are more traditional developing world technologies you see innovators get on the market. This is different. So we'll see, what what Kijewski thinks when they see the outcome of that business plan, but we're in it now. So we'll see about that financial viability piece.
There's the other note. I don't know if she said it, but cost-wise,
Oh,
from
we're
what we know
dramatically
so far, it's almost identical to what it would take to build a block house the way they were doing it before the quake.
Yeah, so it's the same price point as a unsafe block house. So if you just got desperate and started stacking blocks, you could build ours safer for the same price. And a fortified block house, it's order of magnitude cheaper. So a proper block house post-quake is order of magnitude higher than our price point. So in a price point perspective, works. Now, the real thing is, one of our things in the IDP camps now is seeing how much extra revenue people are putting away toward a house, to see what that cash flow will look like, because that could kill you. It's not the final price tag, but how long it takes to buy the house piece by piece and put it up. Inspection. So for the construction of the house, because we've standardized everything, including the formwork, they check it out so they can't change the size of the columns and the beams. They buy the reinforcing steel already tied off to the proper spacing and dimension. All that's quality controlled by prefab. I should say prefabrication is very standard practice in the US. Our stadium expansion was precast concrete, all prefabricated, just put together like Legos, okay? So this is a technology that's quite prevalent. That's how we're trying to build in quality control, because we know the inspection's not there. So in the process of building an E2E home, it's there. But afterward, yeah, I mean, I can't tell you what happened to a family who said, well, maybe I'm gonna try to put another level on it. What we're doing is engineering the frame to have enough strength that it could take that. But we certainly wouldn't advise it, because what we're more afraid of is how they would build that second floor, that slab, as we call it, that the second floor rests on. That's the bigger fear. But our frame itself has enough strength to handle it. It's amazing once you take those blocks out, how little concrete it really takes to build a good skeleton. Look at your human body. It's a very elegant form with a very lightweight skin. If we were built of stone, we wouldn't get away with this. So you just have to do biomimicry. You have to understand what nature's already told you is the way to build. Skeletons show you that. So, let's see how we go. Should we go the back and move forward maybe?
I was just wondering, does your building project include giving jobs to the native Haitians?
Well, that's the only way it works. We don't set up a thing. It's sort of like a franchise model.
That they get money for?
They open their own depot.
Okay.
So local entrepreneur runs their own depot producing the materials. We certify construction crews in the process. So if they want to do their masonry all week and that's their gig, we don't want to stop that. We're going to give them extra side work, because our house goes up in 2 days. So on the weekend, make some extra money and throw up one of our houses. So we're trying to supplement existing entrepreneurial activity, not take business away. Ultimately, we'd love them. For people who can afford to do masonry right, they should do it. But for people who have no option, the families I showed you who've resorted to staying in transitory shelter permanently, we want to give them an option. So we see this as a way of creating more market opportunity. But we don't own a thing. They run it, they build it, they operate it. We are instead kind of the franchise model that gives them the tools and the skill set to do so. We give them the kit. That's it. So, Scott, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I mean, this is really interesting. My question is about scaling up, diffusion. You know, how do you think about this? What do you do from scaling up from a project that looks great, but that, you know, probably in and of itself doesn't solve the, you know, the Haitian problem, much less the global housing
So
problem.
scaling is one of the requirements of the NCIA, our funder. We have to look at how you scale a process. And when we look at some examples in the developing world of successful innovations, they actually have scaled because they've standardized. So the process they develop is standardized. They don't do custom house or custom services. So there was the educational model used in India. They realized that, for example, you couldn't have teachers who were trained to do customized curricula. So instead they did standardized curricula where they could then use people who didn't have formal education, just train them in that curricula and diffuse. We're kind of taking that same model, parascaling. We're saying that, you know, I couldn't possibly train the world in how to build a custom house for everybody in an urban slum. But I can train them how to build this one house, this one template, this one way. It's all standardized, and you can just open one of these and crank that same house out. You can do that, and it's worked in education, it's worked in some of the healthcare fields in doing this idea of parascaling, simplifying, standardizing. We offer one type of house, it looks like this. This is it. Because if we get into customization, then it is an engineering process that requires a custom design, a custom construction team, and custom training, and you could never scale it. So the only way we can even attempt to scale is by parascaling and standardizing. There's really no other way. And initially I was like, well, that's not innovative. In the educational model, that teacher can't respond to a unique student need. But they fill a need that's not being met at all, and there's something to be said for that. And so that's kind of how, Dustin, do you want to jump in?
There's some things that we can't tackle, like
Yeah.
government oversight, zoning, land use, like things like that. So, I mean, like, there's still a bigger picture where when you look at the organization of communities and like an actual slum, how these houses come together that we can't tackle through this model. But by providing the piece of the puzzle that is safe, that does work, that won't fall in the house next to it, we hope to start kind of from a basic level and then put that into a bigger framework of how do you start organizing slums and communities.
I mean,
and
yeah,
things
it's
like
hard,
that.
and I think one of the problems is people don't have an option, so they do whatever they can get their hands on. We just want to give them something they can get their hands on that's a safer alternative, that builds quality control in where it never even existed previously. But you're right, there's no one-size-fits-all solution by any means, for sure. So yes, Steve.
So just the kind of building on this question about scaling up and related to another question about the role of the government. I like your model a lot of, you said listen, innovate, empower. And I also like that you're quite transparent. You say, well, sometimes if you listen, you don't necessarily like what you hear.
No.
And you've got to actually be quite creative. And that model is really looking at that local community of who you're listening to, the end user of this house. And I'm just trying to think in terms of if you were thinking more of the scalability question, who do you want to be listening to?
Mm-hmm.
And because there are people in government that don't have necessarily terribly empowered, don't have a lot of capacity, but there are people, and you see parts of the government in Haiti that are more effective than
Right.
other parts. And there are people trying to solve problems, and particularly a model like yours, which is part of it is you're actually positing this primarily as a private initiative
Right.
in a private domain. But when you think about scale, you never really think about the role of public policy and government. And wouldn't you want to be listening to them
Right.
to see how they're defining the housing crisis,
Correct.
the roles that they might play, and actually the degree to which your innovation solution is empowering at the local level, potentially could be empowering others to want to go out and share that, and that become their mission. And the earlier you do this in a process of developing innovation, the more likely you are that they feel listened to.
And that's why one of our prongs is attaching itself to Martelli's plan for shutting down the camps and the policies that were attached to that. Part of that plan says that if you were a landlord, and we found that many people were renters, either renters of a structure or at least renters of land, if the structure was destroyed or damaged on your property, and you are willing to repair it, we will give you money to do so, and as long as you let families live there 2 years rent-free, which was a policy that was proposed. So I can see tapping into a program like that as a very attractive way of getting this out in a much broader sense. Admittedly, we just want a proof of concept in Leogane, by all means. But I think these activities that are targeting incentive plans and programming that's directed toward housing at the national level, I agree completely, are totally something we want to be sure to be a part of. I think that what's happened with us is that over this 2 years, you want to go so far so fast and get it done, that we pulled ourselves back to the point of we want to prototype out in Leogane and prove it works in Leogane. And that demonstration will then let us bring those folks to come see the possibility. But we can't get ahead of ourselves until we have that. So, but I agree with you completely. And we were thinking that the landlord, the replacement model that was proposed for landlords might be a good idea of a program we could attach ourselves to and try to propagate.
So just to add one, but could the argument be made that you're in the process of trying to design what you think will be a very good process so you actually have something to show, but could you envision or imagine somebody in the public sector coming in and being invited and even to looking, to saying, we're trying to do this right now here in Leogane, that's our objective, but we'd also be interested in your perspectives about if we were thinking about scalability issues, what can we learn from you? What are the ways that you're looking at this?
I would love to know who that contact is in Haiti. I mean, I'll be completely honest. We've heard some feedback on scalability from our external funders who have operated in other countries, but I honestly don't have an appreciation in Haiti of who that person or who that entity would be at the higher levels. And I think that would be such a powerful tool if we had it at our disposal, but I frankly don't know where that resides currently in country, I'll be honest. I'll start here, yeah.
Two questions. The first one on exportability, or how would you take this elsewhere, as we're building on some of the other questions that have been asked. And in some ways, it's kind of despair. You mentioned all of these factors working against you or cutting against this project, and you mentioned very early on that a lot of the best minds sort of checked out because of these things. No public presence to speak of, state or government, very few natural resources, all of these extreme natural conditions, earthquakes, hurricanes. And so in some sense, I can sort of see how it's easy to despair, but on a different level, it seems sort of a cause for optimism because it's a kind of most difficult scenario in which to prove this concept. And so if it works here,
that's what our argument is. If you get to work here,
it'll work easier elsewhere. No, but I'm wondering about your thoughts on that, and also to what extent there might be. I mean, you made also a point about how unique the conditions are in Haiti, and so what might be other kinds of conditions you might see elsewhere? For instance, I'm thinking of Brazil and all the different slums that exist in Brazil, and it's not really an issue of hurricanes or earthquakes, but then these mudslides from heavy rains. So
fire. So when you start thinking of these very dense settlements, there's an advantage to building with the block, right? Because it's fire resistant.
Right.
So yeah, you can't extrapolate the one-size-fits-all solution everywhere, most definitely. But in a lot of the environments where there have been earthquakes, and you think of parts of Pakistan, Turkey, certainly in parts of rural China, there has been a lot of activity in areas where there aren't the economic resources necessarily, and you've seen the same style of construction have the same challenges. So, so it certainly wouldn't be the one-size-fits-all for everyone, right? There's some environments where the other threats due to fire, landslides as you mentioned, suggest a fortified home is necessary. And if they don't have the earthquake threat, then they're not in a position where those blocks necessarily are killers. They might actually save their life given the hazard they face. So the listening includes, at the very beginning, understanding the hazard they face and asking if this is the appropriate solution for that. So, but Mexico City, in my mind, is a great example of a place that could benefit from this high seismic threat. They still have a high wind climate, and we've talked to a lot of people, and I've seen it personally in my own eyes. The standard of construction looks very similar to what you see in Haiti. It's a lot in Latin America. It looks very similar. About solving this problem for Haiti and solving it therefore elsewhere, or how, if you could solve it in Haiti, I think that was your first line of question, and about people pulling out. I do want to comment on people pulling out because I think this is an important point to make. In engineering, a lot of academic research is incentivized by the level, let's be honest, of glamour it would attract. Could you get a patent out of that, start a new startup company out of that, get the highest cited publication that makes the cover of Science or one of these high profile publications, and bring in multi-million-dollar grants to start new centers. That's how universities pay the bills. That's how engineering schools prove their merit. You're not going to make that off of this project. Okay, so a lot of the great minds, they went to Haiti, they looked at what happened, they go, wow, it's that. This is all the things that were done wrong. And then Chile hit, and the funding in the US said, hey, go study Chile because that's, quote, first world infrastructure. So if you want a good example of what San Francisco could look like if we get a big one, go study that. We'll give you US dollars to study that problem. We'll not give you US dollars to go study Haiti. Because no American city looks like Haiti. Interestingly, though, I would argue that New Madrid starts going off in this part of the country, we will look like Haiti, because we don't design for earthquakes here at all. And because we're not designing for an event that doesn't happen very often for us, just like Haiti, they had an earthquake in forever, in anyone's lifetime. We haven't had one here, but the odds are growing that we will soon. So, we'll be hypocrites then to say we shouldn't send money there because that doesn't look like what would happen in America, when it could probably, have a very similar dramatic scenario here. When an earthquake hits in a place you haven't designed for it before, you get a picture like Haiti. It just became more complicated because of the other factors. So that's why I believe solving it for Haiti demonstrates the importance of considering these extreme, low probability but extreme events, and how you do that in a highly resource-constrained environment. And I would argue if you could solve it there, yes, in many of the parts of the developing world, but it would inform a lot about how to solve that problem here. We're resource-constrained. If I told the university that all your new buildings should be seismically designed, and John Affleck Graves looks at the new budget, he'd say, we're stopping building. Cut that executive MBA building right now. That's the reality. We operate with the constraints and the resources we have to get the job done today and hope tomorrow doesn't hold that event. So there's a lot to learn about what happened in Haiti, even for us here, sitting where we are.
Just one other question. I think it was Beth that asked a question about social networks, and I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but you did mention that you were doing a survey of IDPs in Haiti, and the question was about social networks, and so I'm wondering to what extent that's being linked in the method of the survey. Is there a network battery in the survey? Are the networks being systematically?
Right now it's just documenting them.
Just documenting IDPs or documenting?
Just documenting the IDPs, because
connections?
more of it is more what I would call market research, though I don't like to talk in business words. If you understand the cash flow situation, the expectations, the requirements, and also the understanding of why my house collapsed, you'll understand then how you get people into these new homes and if they can even afford to get into it. So this is, an important exercise for us, but we're not using networks in any intelligent way to do that survey. It's a random sampling of people in town. But what we are doing is databasing them, because the cellular network is quite popular and powerful in Haiti. And so the use of text messages and other technologies like that to help keep this community knit together, so that as we roll out potential housing options to them, we can leverage that to bring them in, is what we're going to be doing with that. So they're databasing their demographics, and these families are providing their cell phones and their networks of friends to try to create those trees.
Including a network battery just seems like a really promising opportunity to study the conduits of this innovation.
Most definitely, because right now, when we get to a point of actually trying to roll that out and watching how adoption takes place and how that spreads, then the study of those networks and how they evolve is very important. Most definitely. Yes, I'm sorry.
Two questions relative to the land itself. You said the government doesn't get involved, but do they get involved in the ownership or rights to use the land? And number two, you've not said anything about plumbing facilities. Is there a potential environmental impact from all this?
Okay, so starting first with land tenure. That was the big powder keg that we ran into in Leogane. So to give you a little bit of background, a lot of the NGOs came, Shelter Cluster was set up to start delivering shelter. And people didn't see shelter, I know, Dustin, it was like a year, right, in our work. We didn't see people in transitory shelters. They were in these makeshift ones, sitting in the town square, the soccer field, wherever they could converge. When we talked to some of the NGOs, they explained that their policy is unless you can prove land tenure, that you own this piece of land, you can't get a transitory shelter, period. It doesn't matter that your rubble's right there and you can point to it, it doesn't matter. So that stopped a lot of the sheltering in Leogane, but in the periphery of Leogane, in the more rural parts of the commune, where you had kind of a council of elders approach, that somebody was willing to certify a piece of paper that this family has always held this land, the peers have always lived here, then they would give the shelter. So we saw a lot of shelter activity in the periphery, not a lot in the city limits because of that issue. And with respect to how that was sorted out, no one really fully knows, because what ended up happening is a lot of the displaced people just got moved. When we came back this time, they were gone. And we heard that a lot of them got moved out to the periphery, and some NGOs were buying up pieces of land and building little communes there where they were sheltering people. So the land ownership issue got to be really sticky, because what it meant was that you could not receive foreign aid for even a transitory shelter if you couldn't prove you own the land. By making the reconstruction process of a home something that the individual citizen buys with their money and not me giving it to them, I don't have to certify that it's their land. If they're going to go out and buy it and start building on it, they know it's their land, or they wouldn't put their precious money in it, or they're going to face the consequence of building on something that's not theirs. That's why we don't get in the business of building a house. We sell the components in the free market in the same way they would buy blocks and start building a house again. They could buy ours and build it again, but where they build it, that onus is on them. That means that we can address the people in town who can't prove land ownership, but they're sitting there on the slab that's left behind from their house in their rubble, and they know it's their land. They just can't prove it to get a shelter, which is the unfortunate part. Environmental issues. Okay, so part of the master planning process for Leogane looked at centralized water supply and sewage, sewer lines to be installed. So that is supposed to be part of DNEPA's larger plan for the commune. We don't see that coming anytime soon. We don't know when that's coming, if it will come. So most families, as we've been looking even in the post-quake reconstruction, they are going for the traditional latrine well on my piece of property model. And I don't see that changing. So we're accommodating that model. We're accommodating outdoor cooking with the provision that we could accept utilities easily, because our panels can be easily modified to accept utilities if they arrive in the future, if a grid arrives, but they're not predicated on that. Modifying block is a little harder. Our panels are very easy to modify. They come right off. So we try to be flexible to accommodate it if it comes, but we're not going to kind of bank on it coming, to be honest. Some new houses have wired themselves, but the grid hasn't reached them, so they have the wiring there. And they may choose to do that even with our house, but the grid's not there yet. As an interesting aside, some of the surveys that were done by Drexel post-quake in Leogane suggested that most families liked having their own well because it was their well. And centralized water supply could be damaged and not maintained, or even taken over by somebody with malicious intent and hold a whole area hostage if they cut off the water supply. So they like the redundancy of individual wells. Something happened, I can go to my neighbor, etc. So it was interesting that, again, a lot of the developers coming down to the workshop that they should have first world infrastructure and centralized water distribution system. But if that can't be maintained, and you have a tax base for that, or if there's malicious activity that cuts that supply off, you cripple an entire neighborhood. I think there was a lot of value in recognizing that a decentralized water supply was okay, and there was some value in that robustness of that. So. Yes?
So when are you actually going to be able to start implementing the model?
My goal
What's
is
the
we want to
timeline?
prototype out this year. So we're cracking the whip on these guys. Prototype out this year. So yeah, it's all of them. Actually, the team has been divided into different segments. Like Ben's looking at technology adoption, for example, and developing video programming, part of our Kellogg grant, to help people understand why their houses felt, how this house would be different. So yeah, our goal is to have all these moving parts ready so that we can put a prototype out. And the prototype is what's important because it's tangible. People can come, we'll put that as a public prototype for people to come and experience and use as a community meeting point and an important point of exposure so we can educate a little bit about these new houses. So that's my goal. So, cross fingers and knock on wood.
Tracy, I'll have to say, you seem to have come a long way because I heard you speak probably a year ago and you were going to be using
We're doing
garbage
agriculture,
and banana something.
Yeah, we're doing like agricultural waste products.
Right,
and things
and
like that.
now I'm hearing you, I've been telling everybody about this, and now I'm a liar.
No, you're not. That's in the R&D
Second option.
pipeline, but to be honest with you, I think Dustin and I can both admit that going to MIT for the Venture Lab experience, where they make you think about the financial model and all the points in the supply chain, which again, as an engineer, I assume the supply chain is there.
Right.
For this one, it's not. You start to see the weaknesses in the supply chain and the challenges in getting that agricultural waste in and then processed and pressed, and how that could drive the price point up. And when you start thinking about that, you go, okay, well, what do we have that fits with what they can already do on a street corner? Simple technology. Start there. But we can always go with R&D. The beautiful thing about this approach, the panel can be whatever you can make it out of. And that's the cool part. So we can always go for a greener technology once we have a little more mature understanding of what that supply chain looks like.
We got a little lesson in listening ourselves because that was kind of our idea at first. And then when we were down there in March for the workshop, we went and toured the sugarcane processing factory. And the guy that was giving us the tour was really excited because as he took us through, they have zero waste. They use every single part of the sugarcane.
So efficient.
So like the actual product that they use, they burn to create steam to run the plant. So we would have had to somehow find another option for them to power the plant to even get
Or
access.
move to a new agricultural product, and
Right.
sugarcane was one of the more attractive ones.
Right.
So the nice part with sugarcane is it all comes to the cane mill. Now, when you're going to a different agro product, now you got to canvas the whole commune to collect that waste, and we started looking at that supply chain and that collection model, and it was like going to be financially tough, I think. So price point is such a huge part in addressing bottom of pyramid issues.
Your Revive has obviously been very busy.
Yeah.
The evolution of it in 1 year. So
Yeah, it's grown a lot.
Well, and could there be action too for someone like, I don't know, someone in Haiti who's entrepreneurial could say, hey, I can do something, like there's this, or I have, you know what I'm saying?
Well, we've
I
been
feel
looking
like-
at the recycling collection tools that have been developed by Entrepreneurs Without Borders. Right? That's one, right? So there are, possibilities where people outside of us are setting up potential supply chains we could tap. But in terms of supply chains that we could manage ourselves only, this was the closest one, and now these external ones will provide a supplemental option in the future that we're excited about, but we have to, again, stay close to home or we'll go crazy, so we're trying to